name is Holly Ray Yuzicapi. I come from the Standing Buffalo Dakota Nation. I am an artist. I do all kinds of arts engagement. I love facilitating unique cultural experiences. Every culture in the world has forms of expression. Forms of expression are ways of telling story. So for myself, being Dakota, I know a lot of the connections that I love about my culture help me tell the Dakota version. They are influenced by the Dakota ways of life. So when I think of art, when I think of being able to express myself, I love connecting to my people's way of doing art. And that's our singing, our dancing, using our traditional designs. I love doing cultural arts, as in the original forms of art that our people had. That's all with natural materials. So when I do those kinds of art forms, I feel like I'm more connected to who I am and where I come from. And that's something that I wish for all people, is to have some kind of cultural connection so that their sense of identity is stronger. One of the things that I love about storytelling, it takes people on a journey, and whether we use that storytelling for helping us deal with things, helping us to share our feelings, helping us to share our enthusiasm for stuff, our cultural ways of doing those things, it just makes us have a stronger connection to our people. Because every culture in the world has their own style of forms of expression, I feel like it's really an opportunity for us to learn more about one another. Even though those forms of expression might be different, it's actually similar amongst all cultures. We use forms of expression the same way. One of the things that I love about being Dakota, our traditional language, listening to all the songs that we sing and being able to interpret them the way that my people have done for many generations is very empowering. It's very powerful for me to listen to those songs and go back to like the spaces that maybe my ancestors created them in. So every culture in the world has their own style of whether it's singing, dancing, doing art. When I look at art, for example, when I look at designs, I could tell where people come from based on how the design is used, what things are made out of, and every culture has those things. So it's beautiful how when we express ourselves, tell story, or even view other people's story, that those cultural elements of art, they are very different, but it kind of puts people in history, I guess, because the meaning and the significance behind them is unique to those people. So every culture in the world has forms of expression. Every culture has a way of teaching their people, this is what it means to use these designs. This is what it means to sing this way. This is what it means to dance these dances. And I think it's just beautiful to be able to share with other people, yes, you are different, but we're kind of the same, because all of our forms of expression can help all of us. So a lot of cultures in the world will use their forms of expression to help us take care of our health and well-being. One of the stories that I learned growing up as a kid, my grandfather talked about how in our way, we don't have legends and stories about mental health issues, things like depression, anxiety, because our culture gave us tools to process, tools to use to help us with events and in life. And the storytelling component, it's really powerful to share how you feel. When you go to therapy, you tell a story, you go to counseling, you tell a story. So what are all the cultural ways that we could tell story? And that's how arts is utilized. It can help a lot of people. If you just look at artists who use, black as an angry color, but as an artist we could choose, this is what black means. And a lot of those choices can be influenced by your culture. So the way that we create, it's inspired by feelings that we have. So our culture has given us tools to process events in our life. And, when I think of my people, in our ceremonial dances, in our ceremonial songs, in our celebratory experiences, all of those are all feelings, they're all stories, and we connect with all of them. So I'm sure you all have a favorite song that you like to sing. So when you hear your favorite song, you're probably like, oh my gosh, that's your spirit reacting to that sound and connecting. So, arts is so much more powerful than just things to look at, things to listen to. It really connects with our spirit. And I that's what I love about culture, because it helps you connect and recognize that this is how we can take care of our spirit. So I've spent many years doing cultural engagement facilitation. I've spent a lot of time working with many different kinds of groups, with organizations, with schools, with just people in general, with families that want to connect to culture more. All the years that I've been facilitating, you know, I've learned quite a few things. I've learned of many different perspectives of respecting culture. I've learned many different ways of engaging with people. But one of the common elements that I come across is everybody wants to bring culture into the classroom. And just from my experience, I really believe that there is a way that we could do it that's done respectfully without it becoming cultural appropriation. So respectful representation in the classroom has become kind of a hot topic for me when I do the facilitating, when I facilitate workshops, when I do PD. I think of the teachers, I think of the spaces, I think of the kids. So one of the things that I've kind of learned, I guess, is, you know, that there's a line that we shouldn't cross. And where is that line? Another thing we really need to do is bring awareness of what that line really is. So cultural appropriation and that line, for me, you know, just in my experience in facilitating, because culture means so much to me and I want to protect it, that when I see people disrespecting it, I feel like it's cultural appropriation. And I want people to be aware of that line. So in the classroom, culture should always be represented by people from the culture that you're trying to talk about. I feel that it's appropriate to bring in, you know, if you're doing Indigenous culture or First Nation cultures, you know, find somebody from that culture to come in and lead that work. If you are not Indigenous, you should not be leading Indigenous focused activities, Indigenous teachings. So that line, I feel, is like we could find out where that it's enough for us to understand, but then we don't cross it where we become facilitators or we look like we are the knowledge keepers of somebody else's culture, when really the respectful thing to do is to bring the cultures in, people to represent, you know, the sharings that you want to do from that culture. One of the examples that I use for cultural appropriation is I've learned many different art forms and I've enjoyed doing Ukrainian Easter eggs. Of course, I'm not Ukrainian. So one of the things that I do is as much as I love to do it, I will never facilitate a class. I will never make it look like I have Ukrainian knowledge to be facilitating such a workshop. So when I think of other cultures, you know, that would want to protect their ways, you know, it should be done by their own people. So when I think of bringing cultures into the classroom, you know, who are the people that we could bring in? Where do they come from? And, you know, the story that we want to represent, it should come from the people from that culture. So another concern, or something that I'm more aware of, is pan-indigenizing. One of the things that has been happening is people are taking practices, items of significance from Indigenous cultures and utilizing them as though they represent all people. You know, one of the things I did growing up, and I don't even know how many times, is I made a dream catcher in school. You know, dream catchers come from somebody's culture. It's not every Indigenous culture that has a dream catcher. So we need to recognize that when we are doing activities, that we are not making it look like it represents all Indigenous people. I've traveled all over the world, and being Indigenous, there's a lot of assumptions about me that I came across that weren't necessarily true, but they would be true for other Indigenous people just because that's part of their way of life. So one of the examples I give is moose meat. You know, people always assume that I love moose meat because I'm Indigenous, but moose are not in my people's traditional territory. That wasn't an animal that we hunted and harvested. So I didn't grow up eating moose, and I actually do not like it. But, you know, there's a lot of things that we assume are all across all Indigenous people. And I think that's a little dangerous for us to assume. You know, we always hear assumptions are dangerous. Well, same goes with Indigenous practices, Indigenous cultural beliefs, and Indigenous items. You know, so thinking about, okay, when I'm bringing things into the classroom, what am I representing and what's the story I'm telling, so that we are protecting all Indigenous people from being part of the lumped together teachings. So in all the years that I've been facilitating cultural experiences, I got really tired of being a token presentation. With movements like reconciliation, you know, people are asking, Holly, can you come in and facilitate a workshop? Holly, can you come in and do this craft? Holly, can you come in and do First Nation art with us? You know, I strongly believe that there is a way that we can educate people in a meaningful process so that we are not tokenizing a lot of Indigenous activities. So the way that I facilitate programming is I give everybody an introduction to culture. That way they can recognize how items and experiences fit into culture, that we can organize it, that we can parallel it to other people. So tokenizing, I feel, is something that we are all contributing to if we just continue to do kind of these acts of, we're going to do First Nation art, we're going to listen to this song, without getting any foundation to organize and place that experience. So when we are working in classrooms, it's really important to represent local cultures, local content. We can't send people to a Cree culture camp, come back to a Dakota community and do those kinds of things. Relationship between communities, First Nation and non-First Nation communities is very important, like talking about going back to that pan-indigenizing, we can't go somewhere and bring other Indigenous teachings back when we have people right beside us that probably have something different. So it's respectful to engage with them, to ask them, what are the things that we need to know here on this land that we are on, this location, this space, in this environment. When we include them that way, things are more relevant, more current, and visible for our children, for our learners. Also for our staff, that might be engaging with the First Nations communities or neighboring communities for the first time. Like including the local content is so important. Protocol, asking, what can we do to represent here? What can we do? Like, what's important to you so that we can also give the same message of importance. So some of the things that are important to community, every culture has a process and how they teach everybody that this is how we're connected to one another. It's, it's like a kinship system. One of the things that happens in my community school, I think it's very neat that the kids, when they are in school, you'll hear them say, hi Kushi, hi auntie, hi uncle, and that acknowledgement of the role in each other's life is so important. It creates a sense of belonging. It creates a sense of comfort. So anytime that we can engage how the community uses its culture for connecting, for strengthening identity, I think it's really important to become aware of it so that we can start incorporating that into our classrooms, because it just will help the students in the end feel more comfortable. Your space will be more welcoming, because they know that they can connect in cultural ways and it'll be respected. This one time I was working at a school and this young lady immigrated from Africa, and in her culture she was taught to call all the older women in the room auntie. So when she called her teacher auntie, the teacher said, no, I'm not your auntie, so who's right? One of the things that I recognize in that situation is even how we respond to things that are different. Just because it's different doesn't mean it's wrong. So the teacher could have said, oh, we are in a classroom. I would prefer that you call me, Mrs. So-and-so, instead of outright disrespecting that child's cultural teaching, So being more aware of when we are responding and reacting to cultural differences, sometimes might look negative, but at the same time we need to be able to recognize, oh, this might be a cultural thing. I got to change my response. So in my work as a facilitator, I've done a lot of teacher PD. I'm not pointing out teachers, but when I do teacher PD, I hope that the messages that I give are kind of welcomed. It's not meant to point out anything that's negative. It's just, let's be more aware of maybe this is how it looks. One example of respectful representation in the classroom I have is one time I had a teacher say that we are going to be making wampum belts for when we study the Iroquois Confederacy. So not the teacher not being First Nation, not being Iroquois, the students, were not from that community. When we look at arts, when we look at songs, when we look at cultural practices, we can't just say we are doing these things, we're going to smudge, we're going to dance like First Nation people, we can't just do those things. So representation for me is recognizing how we can understand and have an experience to learn about it, but also to not cross that line of cultural appropriation. So the teacher that said we are making wampum belts, one of the things that they could have done was, we are practicing the same technique that wampum belts are made. Because they are not using the wampum material. They did not go through a process of how, the culture teaches traditional practices. There's a way that all cultures transfer their traditional knowledge. So if you don't participate in any of those, you can't say that you are doing cultural things. So clarifying and representing our activities properly is so important. I think that when we assume or get excited about the topic and say we're going to do these things, we have to be more aware of like, can I actually do that? There's a lot of cultural beliefs of people, who can do what and when. Another example, in my community, our women, we do not drum. We don't use a drum. We don't make drums. We don't sit at a drum. Whereas some other First Nation communities, ladies have a drum. So we can't assume that ladies can just drum all the time, because there are cultures that, that's not appropriate. That's not something that they would do. So again, I guess that kind of speaks back to pan-indigenizing, making all these assumptions of activities. So in the classroom, when you are trying to bring in a cultural teaching, I think there's a way to represent it, even as a non-Indigenous person, acknowledging your role in facilitating that relationship. I have another friend who she's not First Nation, but she can do beadwork. She's actually pretty good at it. And one of the things that she does, she will never lead that work in the classroom. She will bring somebody from the culture, so somebody First Nation that does beadwork, and she will use her own experience and skills to support the students so that they understand it. But she will never lead a beading workshop to make it look like she has Indigenous knowledge. So respectful representation in the classroom is really, what is the messaging? What will people get from it? What does it look like? Does it look like you're a non-Indigenous facilitating Indigenous knowledge? I like to focus on traditional art forms, things that come from the land. Porcupine quill work, hide tanning, doing anything that has creativity involved. So my past has really been helping teachers, helping organizations become more culturally aware. I love facilitating. I can talk forever about cultural engagement, but any opportunity that I have to share, I welcome.